Welcome to another FAR walkthrough video from Superfast CPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video we're going to be going over FAR Area 1, C, application topic, determine the appropriate fund or funds that a state or local government should use to record its activities. And we're going to be doing that the Superfast CPA way, which is diving straight into questions to learn the material. If you want to learn more about our strategies, make sure you go to superfastcpa.com and check out our free 1-hour webinar training. We go over the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam, one of which is diving straight into the questions. What better way to study than to do the thing you're going to be doing on test day, which is multiple choice questions and sims. Instead of watching hours of lectures and reading textbooks, you go straight to the questions. So that's a big thing that we go over in that free 1-hour webinar. Make sure you go check that out. The link will be in the description. Also, just letting you know, we will only be going over 5 questions in today's video, whereas Superfast CPA members will have access to the full 10-question video when we post it in the members forum. So if you like this, you can get more of it by becoming a Superfast CPA member. With all that said, let's dive straight into the questions. All right, here we are at question 1, and something that we always like to point out in Superfast CPA is this strategy, which is going straight to the end of the question and reading that, so that will kind of give you context for the rest of the question. This one's not too complicated, but let's do it anyway. How many funds is the government required to establish? Okay, so we're trying to figure out how many funds they're required to establish. A state government is considering how many different funds it needs to create for proper accounting of its activities. So yeah, we're trying to figure out here what the proper amount, what the required amount is for a government or a state to establish for fund accounting. How many do they have to establish? So let's read through these different options. This is one of those ones where it's very conceptual and it makes sense once you read through the options and understand it. One fund for each department or function within the government. That sounds fine. As many funds as necessary to meet legal accounting and financial reporting requirements. Now, I will say, even though I know the correct answer, whenever in accounting it tells you the minimum required, that's usually what we do in accounting. We usually don't go over what's required. You usually stick to what's absolutely necessary. And then a minimum of 5 funds. I feel like government could have more than just 5, or maybe you could even have less than 5. One fund for each revenue source the government receives. Okay, so going over those, this is one of those situations where when you read through the different responses, one of them or 2 of them will probably stick out as something making the most sense. So let's go ahead and look at the answer to see what the correct answer is. And yep, the correct answer is B, as many funds as necessary to meet legal, accounting, and financial reporting requirements. Okay, that makes sense. And that's the easy answer. Instead of having to have 5 or have 1 for each thing or different things like that, the easy answer is that you just have to have the minimum required. The minimum number of funds a government must establish is the amount necessary to meet its legal, accounting, and financial reporting requirements. It's as easy as that. Governments should not create more funds than necessary, as too many funds can make financial reporting unnecessarily complex. Governments typically establish funds to reflect different purposes, but there is no fixed minimum number beyond what is required to comply with laws, regulations, and to ensure clear and transparent financial reporting. So whatever the government is doing, whatever their objectives are, they have to have the minimum funds required to run and account for those objectives and the money, but other than that, they don't have to have more than that. So that was an easy intro into this topic. Let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 2. Before we read all of this, how much should be recorded in the fiduciary funds? Okay, so we're looking for fiduciary funds. And by the way, this video is kind of building off of the previous video where we talked about the different measurement focuses and basis of accounting for different funds. We talked about the different, governmental funds, fiduciary funds, proprietary funds. We talked about all that in the previous video. So if you haven't seen that one, go watch that one. It will help a lot with this video. So now, with having said that, how much should be recorded as fiduciary funds? So let's read through this. The following information is available for a state government's fund balances at the end of the fiscal year. They have a general fund of $4.5 million, a special revenues fund of $1.2 million, capital projects fund $3 million, pension trusts fund $2.3 million, private purpose trust fund $700,000, custodial funds $1 million, and enterprise funds $2.5 million. Okay, so out of all of those, again, this is assuming you have some experience from the previous video, which ones are fiduciary funds, and therefore you would add them up to get the correct total. Now, if you haven't seen the previous video and you want to continue watching this video, that's totally okay. We're still going to learn from this question. So if you're ready, let's go to the answer. All right, here's the answer, B, $4 million. So let's read through this as kind of a refresher or just to make sure that you got it right if you watched the previous video. Fiduciary funds include pension trust funds, private purpose trust funds, and custodial funds, because those are the only ones that are listed in this problem. but as well as investment trust funds, even though it wasn't listed in this problem. These funds account for assets held in a trustee or custodial capacity for others and cannot be used for government operations. So these are unique. They're not like governmental funds or proprietary funds that are like used by the government and different things like that. Fiduciary funds are literally just funds held for somebody else for a certain purpose. So in this case, the only ones that were fiduciary funds were the pension trust funds, the private purpose trust funds, and the custodial funds. So if you add that all up together, 2.3 plus 700,000 is 3 million, plus a million is $4 million. So that's how much is going to be in the fiduciary funds for this government. So as far as the FAR exam goes, you're not going to go too much deeper than just needing to know what the different funds are and where they would be categorized, and also maybe being able to take a situation and say based off of that event or transaction where that would be recorded in the funds. But other than that, you're not going to dive too much deeper than that because, again, most of governmental accounting is now in BAR. So we're just giving a preliminary overview in the previous video and this video, and then that's it. We're not making any more videos in FAR about governmental accounting. So let's go to the next question to learn a little bit more. All right, here we are at question 3, and let's read the last part of it. In which category should the scholarship programs funds be recorded? Okay, so this is one of those situations where it's really helpful to read the last part of the question, because now when we read through this, we know that we're not really paying attention to anything else besides the scholarships program. So we'll still read through everything, but we only need to really be thinking about the scholarship program funds. So let's read through this. During the fiscal year, the following events occurred in a local city government. They collected property taxes to fund general governmental operations. New public library was constructed using money from a capital improvement bond. City's electric utility. Okay, this is the important thing. The city received and managed funds on behalf of a local scholarship program established by a private donor with the stipulation that the funds be used for specific students. Okay, so that's the whole focus of this question. What is that going to be categorized as? It's managing funds on behalf, that's a key word right there, of a local scholarship program. So think about that keyword, pause the video, based off what we've learned just so far in this video, and especially if you've watched the previous video, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at the answer together. All right, the answer is C, fiduciary funds. And again, the key word here was on behalf. Remember that with fiduciary funds, you are holding, or the government is holding money for somebody, like on behalf of somebody or some organization. So that is a key word. Pay attention for that in other situations. The scholarship program funds are held and managed by the city on behalf of a special or specific beneficiary, which are the students, which means the funds are held in a custodial or trustee capacity. Therefore, they should be recorded in fiduciary funds. And I didn't want to get too detailed. We could have tried to figure out which specific fiduciary fund it needed to be in, but that doesn't seem to be something that you're going to be tested on at all or really very heavily. So just more generally, you need to know that this is a fiduciary fund, even if we don't know the exact type of fiduciary fund. Fiduciary funds are used to account for assets held in trust or as an agent for others. The random category, by the way, if you got caught up by this, public service funds is included as a distractor. This isn't an actual fund, and it does not exist in governmental accounting. The other categories, the governmental funds and the proprietary funds, those are the other types of categories. Governmental funds are used for typical governmental operations like public services, tax collection, and construction, and proprietary funds are used for activities operated kind of like a business, such as you paying utilities to the government. But the only thing that made sense here was the fiduciary funds because, again, they're holding this money and managing it on behalf of the students. Let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 4, and if you'll pay attention, this is actually the exact same question, all the same information, except now it's asking, in which category should the construction of the new public library be recorded? So now we're just taking the same question because there was a lot of information in the previous one, and this is kind of like almost emulating a sim, this question and the previous question, because a lot of times sims will have all this information and then you have to answer multiple questions based off of that. So this is kind of almost like a sim where the previous one you were asked to figure out where one thing was recorded as a fund, and now where is this other one going to be recorded? Where is the new public library going to be recorded as a fund? You want to pay attention to the words that are used and think about the different funds that are in each category. What funds are in the governmental funds? What are in the fiduciary funds? And what are in the proprietary funds? Think about that. If you don't know, that's okay. But if you have watched the previous video, think through the different options, the different funds that there are, and that will give you a hint as to where this new public library is going to be categorized. So pause the video, think about it. When you're ready, come back. All right, here we are. The answer is A. It would be recorded in the governmental funds. Again, if you know the different ones that go into each of these categories, then this would have been a little bit easier because you would have seen capital improvement, which this is a type of fund that's in the governmental funds, a capital projects fund. That would have come to mind if you had seen it before, or if you had watched the previous video. The construction of the new public library funded by a capital improvement bond issue should be recorded in governmental funds. Specifically, it would be recorded in a capital projects fund, which is used to account for financial resources used for the acquisition or construction of major capital facilities. And then this was a red herring. Capital investment funds is a distractor. That's not a real fund. That's not a fund category. Proprietary funds are used for business-like activities, which this didn't really seem like a business where you're charging people money to, take the train or something like that. And it wasn't a fiduciary fund because they're not holding it or watching it on behalf of somebody. They're using this money to improve the government infrastructure. So it wasn't fiduciary, it wasn't proprietary, and capital investment funds don't exist. So this had to be a in-governmental fund. And again, remember, in governmental funds, there are capital projects funds. That's one of the types of governmental funds. All right, with that, let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 5. Let's read this last part. As always, how should these funds be categorized? Okay, so as we're reading this, we need to be thinking, where would this fund go? How should it be treated? A local government receives 2 different trust funds during the fiscal year. Trust Fund 1, Trust Fund 2. Trust Fund 1 has the principal that is legally restricted and only the earnings may be used to maintain a public park. So only the earnings can be used. The principal and any earnings for Trust Fund 2 are legally restricted for the maintenance of a public health program. But again, the difference here is that the principal and the earnings are to be used for this public health program instead of just the earnings up here for Trust Fund 1, where the earnings can only be used on the public park. So this is a very specific question because this is something that may come up. Which of these is going to be a special revenue fund? Which of them is going to be a permanent fund? Or are they both a permanent fund? Are they both a special revenue fund? Again, if you watched the previous video, we talked a little bit about the different kinds of funds. These are both governmental funds, by the way, just throwing that out there. But again, if you don't know, that's okay. If you do have an idea, pause the video and think about it, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at it together. All right, the answer is B. Trust Fund 1 would be classified as a permanent fund, and Trust Fund 2 as a special revenue fund. Okay, now again, typically you won't be tested on too many specific fund types. You're mainly going to be focusing on the measurement focus and the basis of accounting for the different fund categories. You may need to know the different types that go into those categories and what the measurement focus and what the basis of accounting is for them. But again, as far the exam goes, you won't need to know this too crazy in depth, but this is one area that you might need to know, the difference between a permanent fund and a special revenue fund. Permanent funds are used when the principal is legally restricted and only the earnings may be used for purposes that benefit the government or public, as in Trust Fund 1, where the earnings are used to maintain a public park and the principal remains intact. So they can't touch the principal, they can only use the earnings. Special revenue funds are used when both the principal and the earnings are legally restricted for a specific purpose, as in Trust Fund 2, where both are restricted for the maintenance of a public health program. So again, typically you won't have to get this nitty-gritty, with the 11 different fund types. Mainly you're focusing on the measurement focus and the basis of accounting for the fund categories and needing to know what types of funds go into those categories. But as far as what each fund does, you won't need to know too much, but one that you might need to know is permanent funds and special revenue funds. And with that, we've learned a lot in just 5 questions and in just 2 videos, and we're not going to cover anything else for governmental accounting for FAR besides this video and the previous video. But before we go any further, let's do one more part of the Superfast CPA process called Pillar Topics. Now, the idea behind Pillar Topics, if you haven't heard it before, is as you're going through the questions to learn the material, you will notice the things that keep popping up in the questions. You've seen 3 questions trying to teach you the difference between a permanent fund and a special revenue fund. Or you've seen 4 questions trying to teach you about the governmental funds or different things like that. You'll notice the things that keep popping up. So you know they're important, you know they're pillar topics or key topics, so you write them down so that you can know them and keep them for later. Let's go to the pillar topics for this video. All right, here we are at the pillar topics. Again, kind of a summary of the most important things we learned from this video. Minimum number of governmental funds. Governments should establish only the minimum number of funds necessary to meet legal, accounting, and financial reporting requirements to avoid overcomplication. Now, of course, I guess they could have more than that if they really want to, but typically just stick with what the minimum is. And there's no minimum number, it's just whatever they need. Fiduciary funds. Fiduciary funds are used to account for assets the government holds in a custodial or trustee capacity for others, such as pension trust funds or custodial funds, and should not be used for general governmental purposes. Again, the key word in that one question was on behalf. These are funds that are being managed for other people or other organizations. Now, as far as the governmental fund classification, now one thing we did talk about, capital projects for public use, such as the construction of libraries or infrastructure, should be recorded in governmental funds, specifically capital projects funds, as they are financed by public resources or bonds. Next, proprietary funds. Proprietary funds are used to account for government activities that operate similarly to private businesses, such as utilities or public transportation, and include enterprise funds and internal service funds. There's only two proprietary funds, enterprise funds and internal service funds, so make sure you remember that. And then finally, permanent fund versus special revenue fund. Again, you usually won't get this specific about knowing specifically where something is going to go as far as the 11 different fund types, but permanent fund and special revenue fund may be one that you see. Permanent funds are used when this principle is legally restricted and only earnings can be used for public purposes. And that kind of makes sense if you think about what we talked about with nonprofit entities. When something has to be maintained in perpetuity, usually that means that the principal can't be touched and only the earnings can be used for something specific. So it kind of sounds similar to permanent funds, while special revenue funds are used when both principal and earnings are restricted for specific governmental activities. So there is a difference between the two. And that is the end of the pillar topics and the end of the video. Before you go, make sure you go check out our free 1-hour webinar training on superfastcpa.com. Again, we will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam, such as studying early in the morning instead of studying at night after work, such as going straight into the questions to learn the material. Make sure you go check that out, and also remember that we only went over 5 questions in this video, but if you liked it, you can get more of it by becoming a Superfast CPA member, because they will have access to the full 10-question video when we post it in the members forum. If you like the video, make sure to like it and leave a comment. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.